Hello. So for purposes of context and clarity, um, this is the first full video I am recording chronologically after we had to put Rainy down. So that's still a very raw thing for me at the moment. I know in the process of when these are going to be coming out, that was several months ago, and I will have other videos that have come out that'll come out before this one that I recorded after it. In regards to like One Piece videos and other ones that may come out during that time frame, because these Digimon videos get recorded quite a bit in advance, and then I can pop them in as I have the ability to. But I haven't really had that be a secret or anything like that during the time frame that I've been doing these videos, because they're kind of just like content that like this stuff isn't really going to change, so I can just record it a little while in advance. So yeah, for the context of that, yeah, that was only a couple of days ago, and pretty much any video that comes up after this one, there's no more Digimon videos that may have Rainy pop up in the background, unfortunately. So yeah, that's still a raw topic, a pretty raw subject. So we'll see what else ends up happening. I have not, at the moment, we're not sure what we're gonna do with what's going on back here, but we'll see what happens. So, this video is about how the digital world in Digimon Tamers was created. Now, for the original series, for the adventure series, we do get some bits where we kind of find out that, the digital world developed alongside technology and computers and stuff like that. And the digital world in the Tamers is a little bit similar in that regard, as in as technology advanced, so did, kind of the life forms that were in the digital world, that were the Digimon and the Diginomes. So there is that comparison. But the digital world that we see in Tamers seems to be a lot more savage to a degree than the digital world that we see in the original series, because, as I pointed out with the original series has Primary Village. And later on in Digimon Frontier, there's the Village of New Beginnings. And both of those are basically the concept of, if a Digimon dies, then their data basically has the ability to get reincarnated, which goes into the reincarnation concept that's in Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism and stuff like that. That feeds into that concept. And in Digimon Adventures, we see this, that happens with Patamon and with Wormmon and with the, other Digimon and stuff that we see. In Tamers, that is not a concept that seems to be around, because it's pretty much a Digimon gets destroyed and then their data is either absorbed by the Digimon that destroyed them, or just is left to just go into the ether and nothing is done with it. So yes, the digital world that is in Tamers seems to be a bit more of a savage setup than what is in Digimon Adventures, or even in Digimon Frontier, in that regard. But this video is coming out also just after the Digimon, the Monster Makers video, where I talked about kind of how, Jonyu and, a bunch of his friends were the ones that kind of were the catalyst for the digital world going into being created. So, in the timeline that we are given in the series, in the 1980s, 1984 roughly, is when the Monster Makers, or the Wild Bunch is also as they're called, when they all meet up. I went over this. This is Jonyu and Dolphin and Shibumi and Curly and Daisy and Babel. I think I got all of them. All of them are at college together. We never know which college, but they're all at college together. And they start developing basically what end up becoming the original Digimon, these little creations. And there is actually, in doing research for this video, I found out that they actually ended up coming out with like a very short story that was written by one of the screenwriters for Digimon Tamers. And it was illustrated by someone else, I believe, that was part of Digimon, called Digimon Tamers 1984. And it's basically this short story that revolves around the creation of the original Digimon by the monster makers. Well, they do state that it's at Palo Alto University. I'm like, okay, so I guess they did technically say the name of the college, but it's a little bit like, a little bit iffy there. And we get some bits of this in the actual anime itself, where we see, Henry's father, John Yu, having these flashbacks where he's talking about, yeah, we were just kids at college together, and we ended up making these creatures, and we saw that they had personality and everything, and then like the project got shut down. Um, and the project itself was very much based around philosophical and technological issues surrounding the creation of artificial intelligence, which nowadays we're having this big conversation about, like, with like chat gtp and like some and other things like that, where there's just like, so how far has artificial intelligence come and things like that. And not that like the concept of like artificial intelligence wasn't around back in the 2000s or even like earlier than that, because of course, comic books and stuff like that and science fiction had been around for a very long time at that point, by that point. So it wouldn't be a huge surprise if the concept of artificial intelligence had already like seeped its way in at that point in time, and like, with as quickly as computers were advancing. But they made this group, and they, this group of friends, college students, ended up developing these creatures that ended up that were the basis for Digimon. And then, as I went over in their video, at some point in time, around 1984 or so is when the project got shut down, and the group had to disband. And they thought that they had deleted these Digimon. They didn't want to, but they thought they had. And in actuality, the Digimon, the data that they had created that were the basis for these Digimon, these very rudimentary Digimon, so probably close to like what would be like the base forms of, like the freshie and baby and like maybe up to rookie, like kind of that level of like, complicated data and stuff like that. So not exceedingly complicated data, nothing that would be on the level of, mega level and ultimate level and stuff like that, but the more base forms. And those Digimon, that data ended up on basically probably what was a comparison of like, the very early versions of the internet. And also in Digimon Tamers, there is a creature that is called the Diginome. And this is this little digital, well, it's basically like a digital gnome. And this is not a creature that, as far as I'm aware, pops up in any of the other Digimon. It doesn't pop up in Adventures at all. I don't remember it ever popping up in Digimon Frontier or in any of the other ones, but it shows up. There are these creatures that have the ability to kind of help manifest dreams, because we see them do this several times throughout the course of the series, or they're kind of separate from the Digimon, but they're similar to them. And when the Tamers are talking to the Sovereigns, after they've kind of calmed the Sovereigns down and are not being attacked by them anymore, Azulongmon gives them this description of what happened. And it was that the earliest stages of the existence of the digital world, of the incarnation of the digital world, were very much like this barren desert. And it grew alongside the Earth's communication network. So just very similarly to how the digital world grew in Digimon Adventures, that as human technology and communication grew and grew and grew and expanded and evolved, so did the digital world. And the way that he describes it is that new layers were added to the digital world. And we see this when we see this a little bit in Digimon Adventure, where we get like this comparison to like, oh, how the digital world fit there. But it's very much more evident in Digimon Tamers when the kids are trying to go from the human world into the digital world, or anytime that we see some of the wild ones, the Digimon that are like appearing from the digital world into the real world inside of the digital fields. anytime those show up, a lot of the time, or several times when those show up, we see this like digital plane area that they come from that is this in-between place between the digital world and the real world. And when the kids have to go to the digital world to try to go save Calamon, they have to go basically through the opposite way. They have to find a portal or like a little rift or a tear between the digital world and the real world, and they do. And they go through that and they go into the digital world. And during the time frame they're going from that into the digital world, they're in this area where there is no rhyme or reason and no logic for what's up, what's down, what's left, what's right, anything like that. And, Renamon and Leomon are like the two that have the most experience dealing with this, and they kind of help, guide the kids through. But then when they see the digital world, they just see this thing that looks like this giant mass of layers and coding and all this other stuff. And I don't exactly know how to describe it, but this giant orb of these, of this stuff, that does kind of look like a planet, but it also looks like it's, like a planet wrapped in other stuff, like it's layered exactly as like Azulangmon describes it. And once they arrive in the digital world, they see that there's all these different layers as they, traverse through the digital world. There's like this outer layer that looks very much like a desert. There's another layer that looks a lot like just like a peaceful forest, pond, swamp area. There's another one that looks like this cloud area. There's another one that looks like a weird town, and there's like different sections within the digital world itself, within these layers where different Digimon live. And what Azulangmon explains is that all of these layers developed over time as humanity and the human communication network grew. And some are more advanced than others, some are more hostile than others. So it was all these different layers. And, sometimes it was harder to travel from one layer to the next. Sometimes it was easier. It all depended on your strength and how easily, it all depended like on how strong you were, but also just, how much I guess you wanted to leave your area. And some didn't want to leave because there were like villages and towns and stuff like that within the digital world where we saw different Digimon where the Tamers interacted with them and stuff like that. And, they also had like these giant, similar to like a searchlight, but like, if it's the searchlight coming down from the helicopter and like, looking over the ground, that looked like these giant data streams that was transferring information to and from the digital world into the real world. And if you get sucked into those, you could get, launched into a different part of the digital world, which we see happen several times with the children. Rika, Kazu, and Kenta end up getting sucked into one. Later on, Henry and Takato and Terriermon get sucked into one. Sometimes they do it on purpose. Sometimes it's on accident. It all just depends, and they all get shifted around that way, and it acts like this way of like teleporting them from one section to a different one. And even Rio, who lived in the digital world for probably around a year at this point in time, as far as we can tell, he's learned how to deal a lot with this stuff, but it's still not something that he knows 100% how it works. He can give you pointers, but he's like, I can't 100% explain it. I just jump into one and I go to a different spot, following Cyberdramon because he wants to fight things. And also in the digital world, which I love this, they also have digital tumbleweeds that are adorable. They're just like these little packets of data that are like these like little, they look literally like tumbleweeds, and they roll around the digital world. And that's just exactly how they work. They're little tumbleweeds of data. Just like there's tumbleweeds in the desert, there's tumbleweeds of data. And then it also shows that the Digimon have the ability to eat the data, to consume it one way or another. The very good example of this is, when like a Digimon destroys another Digimon, they are able to like absorb their data. We see Rika and Renamon very much doing this at the beginning of the series. Whenever they defeat one of the wild ones that pops up, Renamon will absorb the Digimon's data. We see Guilmon do this a couple of times. I think we see Terriermon do this a little bit. Intmon as Beelzemon does this quite a bit when he's, first given the ability to, digivolve and such. He goes through that a lot. But one of the other variations that we see of this is during the episode where Jerry is kidnapped by Orochimon, and Orochimon has Jerry continuously feed him these milkshakes. It's sake. She's giving him sake, but where she's feeding him that, and we find out that all of those milkshakes or sake is loaded down with lots and lots of different data packets and stuff like that. Like the digital tumbleweeds are mixed in with there because it's a way of keeping him stronger so he can absorb the data that way. They also use the data packets to heal Andromon when he gets injured by Orochimon. And we also find out later on when Takato and Henry are discussing things with Shibumi that the Shibumi's theory for how Gilmon was created, because Gilmon was a Digimon that was created from Takato's imagination, that, Takato just drew Gilmon up one day and wrote all this, information down about it, like, he's a rookie, his name's this, he can do this type of stuff. And then it gets scanned by his, by the Digivice, and then Gilmon appears. And Shibumi theorizes that that was the Diginomes at work because they sensed Takato's wish to be able to create Gilmon. And they gathered, they had the blueprints for Gilmon from it being scanned from Takato's Digivice. And they gathered up all of this extra data and they put it together. And then that basically is what turned into Gilmon. It doesn't make Gilmon really all that different from any other Digimon. It's just that Gilmon was this original Digimon that Takato made, as opposed to, like Renamon, for example, that the digital world already had a blueprint for Renamon and what Renamon could become and what it would, what she digivolves from and what she could digivolve into. They did not have this blueprint for Gilmon until Takato came up with one. And then the Diginomes made it real. Azulongmon also mentions throughout the course of their talk that as the digital world grew, when the digital world was still on the very basic level, where we says where our ancestors, the very ancient, original forms of Digimon lived alongside the Diginomes, that was also where the D-Reaper was. The base form of what the D-Reaper would become. I'm going to have a whole other video where I talk about the D-Reaper itself, but where there's this, where was this, what was the D-Reaper, and then what was the Digimon, and what was the Diginomes. And at some point in time, the D-Reaper kind of got pushed back, and it got held back, and that's where it ended up evolving on its own. But the Digimon, along with the help of the Diginomes, were able to build up the digital world, and with all this other, with all the communications and everything that we're developing in the human world between computers and cell phones and smartphones later on, and the internet and everything else, all these advances in human technology, the digital world grew and grew and grew and became more complicated and more layered and everything. And of course, the four Digimon sovereigns, reigned, and then they also had the Devas that were designed, that were their guard basically, and they also had the Diginomes around them. And of course, in this regard, there's also the ability to digivolve, which is of course where Calamon or the Catalyst comes into play. And I mentioned the Diginomes when I talked about Calamon because Azulongmon had asked the Diginomes to turn the Catalyst into a Digimon so it could be protected. And they turned the Catalyst into Calamon, and the Calamon got sent to the human world, got sent to the real world. And, that's of course what leads to, Chuchalmon. Azulongmon is one I always remember the name because he's the one that's both in Digimon Adventures and Digimon Tamers. Or we actually get full blown an actual conversation with the giant Digimon with the mustache. And then there's Chuchalmon because he's the other main one that we interact with in Digimon Tamers. But then there's I can never remember 100% the other two Digimon that are the tiger and the turtle, and I'm sorry. I know I did a video about them as the Digimon Sovereign for Digimon Adventures, and even then I had to keep looking at the thing to remember which one was which. And later on, I will end up doing a video where I talk about these 4 Digimon sovereigns, because they are a little bit of a difference. Their story is a little bit different than what we see in Digimon Adventures. But the sovereigns and the Devas were kind of tasked with trying to, protect the digital world and stuff like that. And of course, their task is also to try to defeat the D-Reaper, as happens later. But yes, there is lots of other areas within the digital world. There's, of course, the land of the sovereign, where all 4 sovereign Digimon reside. There's, of course, Chowmon. There's Baihumon, who is the white tiger. There is Banwumon, which is the turtle. And then, of course, there's Azulongmon, that is the dragon. And then, of course, there's underwater, library cave area. And then there's, of course, the warped black and white area. There's a desert. There's an area with a forest, lakes, and rivers. That's where the Geckomon reside. And then there's, of course, the area with white sand, clocks, and gears. And none of these different areas beyond the realm of the sovereigns, I mean, yes, the Tamers go to them, and yes, they interact with Digimon that are there, but there doesn't seem to be any form of oh, this area is more preferred to live in than the others. Although, admittedly, if I had to choose between living in the desert area and living in the forest and rivers area, I would prefer to live in the forest and rivers area, just because the desert area does seem to be a bit more dangerous. And throughout the course of the series, we know that Yamaki and Hypnos are trying to, of course, they're aware of the existence of the digital world because of the wild ones and everything like that, because they keep appearing. And of course, their intention is to try to either destroy them or stop destroy the digital world, or stop stuff from the digital world being able to come into the real world, which of course we find out doesn't really happen. That doesn't end up being successful. And of course, I have the whole video about Yamaki. And his his very fun realization of how things work in that regard. And we know that throughout the course of the series, as the wild ones, the wild bunch, the monster makers, they of course learn about oh, these creatures that you developed way back when actually did survive. They're not gone. They ended up developing into the Digimon that you see now. That, part of it, yes, is fed by probably the card games and the video games and stuff like that we see the kids playing throughout the course of the beginning of the series. And that's affected by it. And I'm pretty sure that when whatever company ended up developing the Digimon, the card game more and the video games more, because we see Henry play a Digimon video game, and then of course Takato and his friends have the card game, and Rika and stuff, we of course learned that, it's probably easy to deduce that, when that company got a hold of that stuff and started to develop all of those Digimon more, that those were the blueprints for a lot of the other Digimon. That would end up be coming along down the line, because I do believe we see stuff, because we know that Terriermon and Renamon and Leomon, along with several of the other Digimon, as I mentioned, all had basically blueprints for what they were turned into. And of course, as I also stated, the context of Tamers is that these are kids that grew up watching the Digimon Adventures series. So with the Digimon Adventure series, they watched, Ty and Davis and their groups have all of their adventures. And then the company that, kind of produced those series, were using them as a way to promote the card game, which is, of course, a very fun, commentary on the fact of what happens nowadays, where, yes, with Pokemon, there's the video games, and there's all the toys, and there's the card games, and there's the anime, and they all kind of self-promote each other. And with Digimon at the time, it was kind of this very similar thing. And yes, there are still Digimon games. I have at least one or two over here in in my little cabinet that I have over here. And, so this concept of, having the game and the show and the card game and the toys all promote each other makes perfect sense. And, I'm sure that when the Digimon company or whatever that was making the company or whoever within the context of Digimon Tamers world, that the company that designed the cards and the video games and stuff like that, and that when those connected to the digital world, that resulted in basically this explosion of new Digimon. Also, one of the other features that I find kind of cute, well, I guess cute can be a relative term, but interesting about the digital world in the Tamers world is that whenever it goes from day to night or night to day, it is literally like flipping a light switch. Like, oh, it's nighttime, everything's dark. It's just like darkness just like falls over the digital world. Then it's morning, everything's light. It's not like this. There's not a sunset in the digital world. There's not really a sun in the digital world. And one of the other things that they pointed out is that in the digital world, you don't get hungry as much because Rio mentions to the rest of the group when he's around them that, oh, well, I don't remember the last time I ate, but now that I thought about it, I'll probably end up getting hungry. And Takato and his group kind of go through the same thing where they kind of figure out, oh, I guess we are hungry, but we hadn't thought about it that way before, because Digimon don't necessarily always need to consume food. They can consume data. Also, as is a trend that happens throughout most of the series, overall, any rookie Digimon, baby Digimon, whatever in training they call them, all of those ones are bottomless pits when it comes to food, because we see that very much with Guilmon throughout the course of the entire series. He is just a bottomless pit when it comes to food, particularly bread. And so we have that. So yeah, that's this funny thing is like when the Digimon end up in the digital world, like Guilmon, yeah, he's he gets hungry, but it's not as big of a deal because he's in a place that is nothing but pure data around him. And so we have that. What was the other thing I wanted to mention? Day to night is just like flipping a switch. When Takato and Henry and Terriermon get separated from the group, and they end up in like this underwater cave area. When they end up there, Henry does an experiment where he tries to figure out whether or not it's basically like this mind over matter experiment that he does, where he ends up going into the water and he is trying to figure out whether or not the water will actually feel wet to him. And I love this concept because it is very much this thing of like, if I don't want the water to get me wet, or I want it to be that I can breathe underwater, then I should be able to. And Henry does this and he proves his theory, and he's able to stay underwater and not get wet, and he can breathe underwater, and it's perfectly fine. And then he explains his findings to Takato and Terriermon, and through the communication device that they have, that he's able to explain his theory to his dad. And they're able to, that's how him and Takato were able to then leave that part of the digital world and go into a different part. Because they're able to do this mind over matter exercise where they're able to think, I can go in the water and I can breathe water, but I'm not going to get wet, but I can still swim. And that's what they're able to do. And it's a clever way of going around the trope of like, well, we don't have to draw them wet when they get out of the water the whole time. Also, we need a way of getting them out of the cave. So let's try this. And I like that concept, how they did that. I like that theorizing that they did there. And, we see things that we learned during the, when we're dealing with the D Reaper, is that the digital world itself went through a lot of damage during the battle with the D Reaper. And we see that illustrated later on, which I'll go over a lot more when I do the D Reaper video. But we know that the digital world took a lot of damage from the D Reaper. And we know that by a technicality, we get to see kind of on like a larger scale thing when the monster makers design the arc, and then when they change the arc and turn it into Grani later on, that we kind of get this example of basically how Digimon grew. And I'll go on this a lot more detail when I talk about Grani. When I do Grani's video, which will probably be pretty soon, in regards to when these come out. But in regards to Grani, it is, they build the arc, and they even state that one of the codes that they used to build the arc was the code that they originally used to create the Digimon from way back when, as part of the base, because they didn't have time to rewrite everything and come up with a new code, so they use that as a base. And then we see, Grani kind of, the arc kind of evolves a sentience of its own, and then of course they turn it into Grani through, adding in some new things here and there. And it is kind of, the Diginomes are kind of what result in it being able to, come to life. Again, much more in detail about that when I do the Grani video. But we're able to see that they were able to, like on this small scale, basically show how they made Digimon in the first place by using Grani as an example. Because Grani ends up becoming this sentient thing on its own, and kind of its own version somewhat of a Digimon. And it makes this choice to give Takato and Guilmon his power, so that way they can then, defeat the D-Reaper and save Jerry and save the world. So I like how they did that. We get to see kind of this, this process kind of on a much smaller scale on this, creature that we kind of saw from the beginning. And it's very similar to what happens with Guilmon. So I like how they show that. I like how they go through this, how the digital world and the Tamers world was created. And I do like how they show that quite a bit. We get some explanations about stuff from Shibumi, which I went over a bit in the, the video where I talked about the monster makers and stuff like that. And of course, whenever a Digimon goes into the real world, there is this digital field that looks like a fog bank shows up that allows them to, turn into, something that's, a physical form within the real world. I'll probably go into that a little bit more when I talk about, because I am going to do a video where I talk about all of the different, the wild ones, all the different Digimon that pop up throughout the series that the Tamers have to deal with, before all the Devas show up. I'll do a video where I talk about those and go through all of those different Digimon. So that's what I have for this. I don't know which one I have set to come up next in regards to these videos for some other stuff. Grani will probably be pretty soon. I have another one about Digivolving, the way that it's shown, and the factors to it in Digimon Tamers that I'll be doing soon. As I said, I will do a video about like all the different wild ones that shows up, and a video about the D-Reaper, of course, and one about the Sovereigns, but I just haven't quite figured out which ones and what order they're going to be in. But that's what I have for the moment. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye! When we designed the prototype, we wanted to give kids a way to communicate with and control Digimon on the network.